Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Fabio Palvelli and I'm a designer. Every week on this channel I share a little bit of my life on video whilst trying to bridge the gap between business and design. This week on my channel I have the honor and the pleasure to sit down with the one and only Blair Enns of the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. This is one of the greatest pieces of literature for any artist or any design manager that is either thinking to up their game in their field, or for all those artists which are thinking to maybe start their own freelance career or maybe start their own creative agency. This book has had a very big impact in my transition from being a designer, working in production, and moving into more of a consulting framework. But anyway, the conversation that I'm about to have with Blair is very intense. There is a lot of value that Blair shares with me, and I think that the questions really get to the core of some of the biggest issues that creatives all over the world experience on a daily basis with the management of their company, with dealing with clients, with understanding the value of the services that they produce. But anyway, enough of me blah blah blah, just enjoy this beautiful talk. Blair, first of all, thanks a lot for taking the time. Would you mind telling us who you are and what you do and why people should be listening to this particular episode of the show?
Yeah, thank you, Fabio. It's really my pleasure to be here. Who I am, I'm a guy who has just returned from 3 weeks vacation, and this is the first bit of real work that I've done since then. So I might be a little bit kind of loose and comfortable and forget some of the key thoughts. Why should people listen to me? I'm the founder and CEO of Win Without Pitching, which is a training organization for creative professionals. It's effectively sales training, sales and pricing, and a few other related topics. And I'm the author of 2 books. The first is the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, and which came out in 2010. And the second is Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour, which came out at the beginning of 2018.
I am very acquainted with both of your books. The Win Without Pitching is over there, and the link to the other one is on my screen. And sometimes, I just go and be like, what would Blair do? Listen, I love your book, especially the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. I think that this was really the initial book that put me, on the path to make things a little bit different. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what the book is about and how creative people could benefit from reading it?
Sure. And I appreciate that the manifesto has made an impact on you. It is a manifesto, so the voice is a little bit bold and strong, and it's putting forward principles. There are 12 principles in the book. Each has its own chapter. They're called proclamations. So it's a proclamation to oneself, really. We shall, we will. From this moment forward, we will no longer. It was a bit of a risky proposition for me to write in that voice, but I've always loved manifestos. So I've always wanted to be able to publish a book in that tone of voice, and it's really taken off. There are well over 30,000 copies sold, and annual sales have increased every year for the last, but maybe for every year since it first came out 10 years ago. And so again, it's a book of business practices, specifically new business or sales and marketing practices for creative professionals. The audience is that when I wrote it, I imagined an audience of one, as I often do when I'm writing. I imagined a solo artist or designer launching his or her design firm, and I would imagine that person at various points of kind of their career trajectory. I'd think of them just starting out. I'd think of them adding a few people. In reality, I think the principles or proclamations are relevant to anybody in a a creative firm, probably anybody in any professional services firm. But I don't know the subject of selling as much as I know the subject of creative people, because that's really my passion. I love creative people, and I understand the peculiarities of the creative personality that makes selling difficult. So that's who I thought of. That's the target audience. It's, as in most things marketing, there's relevance beyond the target market. But it's really, I was thinking of designers and designers going into business for themselves and the principles that they really should adopt so that they can conduct themselves with authority and integrity in the sale, and help them in that moment when I think creative people are most vulnerable. And that's when they're standing in front of a prospective client trying to close a deal. And they're vulnerable for a lot of reasons. And a big reason is, what they're selling is highly personal. So it's a very personal thing, and they don't feel like they're equipped for that moment. They didn't sign up. They didn't launch their own firm because they loved to sell. They launched their own firm because they love to create. And in that moment when they have to sell is a moment when they're very vulnerable. And that book is designed, and my entire training practice is designed to help that person in that moment.
I think this is the reason why the book resonated with me, almost instantly. Because I really do remember reading some parts of it, and I was like, was this guy sitting in the same room with me when the client was mind raping me? Okay, I have a statement for you, which I absolutely love. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. I love this
Mark
statement.
Twain.
I love the statement. I read it the first time from your book. I think I understand what you mean by that, but at the same time, I guess that sometimes this gives room to the wrong interpretation. Would you mind breaking it down for me, please, and for the people that are listening from home?
Sure thing. I love that quote. It's from Mark Twain. And I think Tim Ferriss, in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, that came out about the same time as my book, I think he cited the same quote. And what it means to me is, if everybody's doing it, it's probably wrong. And that's not, obviously, that's not a truism. That's not always true. But I think it's a helpful point of view. And I inserted that quote at the beginning of the book because I was thinking about the conventions of the pitch, where when in my early days in the creative firm, I started in an ad agency that was also a PR firm and also a design firm. It was a full service marketing communication agency. And I was, at a very young age, handed responsibility for new business development. And I eagerly took it on and said, okay, how is this done? And I was taught to do it how those before me were taught to do it, and that is, you work hard to get a meeting. In the meeting, you get a project so that you get a foot in the door. You try to grow that project into an account, or more often, you would try to get on a pitch list. So when a client was ready to change agencies, you were one of many firms who would receive the RFP. Back in the day, it was via fax. Now it's via email. And you get a chance to pitch and a chance to give all of your highest value product away for free as a means of earning the larger account. So I was just taught, well, this is how it's always done. And I think anytime you're in a situation where you're questioning, well, does this really make sense? And somebody says to you, well, that's just, don't fight it. That's just the way it's done. That's when you really need to stop and think about, well, these things that kind of get ingrained in ourselves, in our firms, in our industries, in our professions, that are just always the way it's done. There's often not a very good reason behind it. Often it's accumulation of bad reasons, or it was a good reason at the time and things have changed and we haven't changed with it. So that quote is really about just challenging the idea that this is how it it's always done.
Yes, makes total sense. Okay, let's go back a little bit to the book, because I think that, by itself, if people really went through the 12 proclamations, they will get so much value, or at least they will get the inspiration to start thinking about themselves and the work that they can offer in a different way. And I'm gonna touch up a little bit on this later as well. But in your book, these 12 proclamations, the first one is, we will specialize. You touch up on a lot of positioning. I think that right at the very beginning of the book, you hit the nail on the head. The problem, however, is that especially in the creative industry, a lot of firms, and even more the freelancers, they go into business without considering positioning because they're just eager to get started. Then they find themselves lost in the sea of competition because of their lack of patience mainly, right? And in a way, I admire that, and I'm not criticizing it because it takes guts to get started and take these initial risks. The question that I have for you is, how do you fix positioning once you're already out there fighting for scraps for your company?
That's a good question. There's no easy answer to that. It's a good observation, though. And it's, these people who are, and I'm in support of, I love entrepreneurs. Anybody who has the guts to start a business, hats off. You're one of my heroes. Even if you fail, you're one of my heroes. Failed entrepreneurs are, I just, like, whether you succeed or whether you fail, just the fact that you're trying, you're taking this risk makes you a wonderful, fascinating, to me, an interesting person. But as we start our business, you think of it, with our first client, we're a specialist. When you have one client, you are a specialist. You do this one thing for this one type of client. So you have this intersection of discipline, what you do, and markets, who you do it for. And then you add a second client, and it's usually similar to the first client because there's some sort of relationship there, usually. Or not always, but if you look at the first few accounts you have, there's usually some sort of relationship, either a discipline relationship or a market relationship. And then at some point this thought hits you, and the thought is, I need to diversify, because you think you see risk in having your client so concentrated. And Warren Buffett has this quote that I've mangled a little bit, and it's, diversification is for people who don't know what they're doing. And you think about that, diversification is a risk mitigation strategy. And I often hear people say, well, I don't want to be pigeonholed as the guy or girl who does X. And my response is, the pigeonholes are stuffed with cash. But I also understand that in the early days of your business, job one is simply to survive. So you take whatever you can take. And I think in the beginning, especially at the beginning of your career, it's not only okay, it's almost expected that you would open up your doors, you would have some sort of claim of discipline for market, but it wouldn't necessarily be all that narrow. It might be broad, and then you get stuff outside of that space, and you just keep saying yes, 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 and you validate to yourself in the market that you have something that people are willing to pay for. And we, as advisors to creative people, we need to allow that to happen, because in the early part of your career, you should have lots of variety. You should be trying all kinds of different things. Life is a bit of a process of elimination. Your business is a bit of a process of elimination. So you should be open to doing all kinds of different things so that you can figure out what it is that you love. You can figure out where there's a market. You can figure out what it is that you're really good at. And then you start to specialize. And it gets tricky from there. And your question is, how do you fix positioning? But you would look at those areas, what do I love to do? First of all, I would say, where's the market? What's the easiest type of business for me to win? Where do I make the most money? And then I would have you think about what you love a little bit later, because I think most designers and creative people, what they really love is solving the problem. And they have at times very narrow ideas of what types of problems that they're going to find interesting. And I think they're usually wrong about that. So there's all kinds of problems in the world that a designer can solve. So just put on hold for the time being this idea of what it is that you love. Don't dismiss it entirely, but don't let it drive everything. Where's the market? And then once you get a sense of, okay, that there's enough types of businesses like this or looking for services like that, then see if you can't define your future market in terms of your future positioning in terms of discipline and market. What do you do, or what are you going to do, and for whom are you going to do it? So at a high level, I think that's how you really think about it. So you allow yourself to start broad when you're young so that you can try on all kinds of different things. And then you start to narrow when you're becoming frustrated with how difficult it is for you to win business, or when you're feeling like you're not able to charge as much as you would like to charge. And that's because you're seen as a generalist and it's time to specialize. And so you think of specialization as having these two core dimensions of discipline and market.
Okay, and what about like the fact that some of these artists, they put themselves on the market in the very beginning of their career, and they do it at a very low and almost entry point price tag. So for instance, they try to do work as cheap as possible just to get everything that they can. I've seen myself people like burning themselves out because of this strategy. Wouldn't make sense for people to, especially in the beginning, to kind of build their experience maybe under the hood of somebody that has more experience before trying their hand at going freelance or try to open their own company?
I think generally speaking, that's great advice. Get your experience on somebody else's dime, as we would say over here. Have somebody else paying you to learn. So go to work for others, try different jobs, go into jobs that allow you to do multiple different things. Go work for specialists and then go work for a different specialist, etc. And play around. In the beginning, your career should look like this, up and down. And then over time, it should kind of narrow the focus. But to your first point about low pricing to gain experience, that's a perfectly valid strategy. And in the larger business world, that's simply known as penetration pricing. And when you want to penetrate into a market, you drop your price as a way of getting into that market. And it's perfectly valid for creative people to do that. The challenge is the tools that get you to the first level of success become ingrained, and I'll explain what they are in a minute. They become ingrained, and the longer you use those tools, the harder it is to let go of them and get to the second level of success, which requires different tools. So the two tools that get you to the first level of success in business are effort. So work hard. The advice that your parents gave you is absolutely true. Work as hard as you can. Number one. And number two, say yes to everything. So that doesn't sound like a generalist. It doesn't sound like a specialist, does it? So work hard, say yes to everything. And then you build up your body of work, you build up your confidence, you build up your competence, you might build up a bit of a market reputation, even though it's going to be fairly broad as a generalist. And then to get to the second level of success, the tools that get you there, where you can actually start to get rich, or that's a relative term, where you can enjoy true financial success and career success on basically every measure. The tools that get you there are quite different. So instead of hard work or effort and saying yes to everything, you now say no to almost everything. So instead of saying yes, you're now saying no to almost everything, and you're narrowing your focus and you're being very selective, and you're replacing effort or hard work with the risk. Because at the end of the day, if your income is tied to your effort, you're not going to make very much money, and you're going to have to work really, really hard for a very long period of time if you want to make a decent living. But as soon as you start to be financially rewarded for the risk you take, then everything changes. So Peter Drucker, who is in some ways the father of management consulting and the author of 60 books on management, he has many great quotes, and the one that I quote most often is this: in business, all profit is derived from risk. So you think in the early days, you're not really a business. You've got a job, right? You're a freelancer, you're a solopreneur. It's not really a business. You're not really making a profit per se. Everything that you earn is essentially a wage. But when you start adding employees and overhead, you start making these investments without guarantee of return on those investments, that's entrepreneurial risk, and that is the source of profit. And profit is the extraordinary income that you earn above your wage. Your wage is what you get paid for what you do, and then profit is the extra earnings above that for the risk that you take. Yeah. So when you're working hard all the time for too long, if that's been your modus operandi for 10 or 20 years, it's really hard to let go of that and move on to the next level. So the sooner you can do that, the better, but it is perfectly appropriate to start out as a generalist and cutting price.
I see it very often with fairly established companies. They charge, say, I give you a random number, 2K for an architectural visualization image, and then they'll tell you, well, that's what the market is.
Yeah.
And actually, I get to talk to other offices which are charging 7, 8, 10 grand for an image. And it's very hard to convince them otherwise that, there is actually the potential to charge more. I would like only to make a little indent in what you said, because I don't want... I've had conversations of this kind already on my channel, and I know that people tend to get confused on certain things. When we talk about cutting prices, we have to do it by being careful, meaning you cannot put yourself out there risking to lose your house because you want to penetrate the market with a price that it's 1/10 of what the industry standard is, right? I mean, even if you had investments behind you, it's very risky, because then you'll be considered the 1/10 of the price guy.
And then how long are you going to stay there? So I often would say to my clients, if you're building experience and you need this piece of work for the portfolio, and it's a competitive situation, you're competing for it, instead of cutting price, why don't you just do it for free?
Yeah.
So this is a radical idea. Why don't you? Because the difference is, you start cutting price, it will be hard for you, or anytime you say, okay, this is my price, that becomes the benchmark, and it's difficult for you to raise the price from there. If you say, if you said to the client, had an honest conversation, listen, I think I would do a really good job at this. I've never done this before, or I don't have a lot of experience at it, but I'm going to work really hard at it, put all the effort in. And I know you could pay a certain amount of money and go get somebody who's done this a bunch of times, but I also feel equally confident that I can get to the same level of quality. If you're willing to give me this job, I'm willing to do this for free. Now, this is a radical idea. Just think about this. I'm willing to do this for free because I need 1 or 2 of these in my portfolio to build my business. So if I were willing to do that, would you give me the job? And so if I gave, as I am now, if I give that advice to your viewers, and what I know they're not going to do is that is not going to be the benchmark of future pricing, right? You cannot stay at free for more than 1 or 2 jobs so that you get the experience. And then from there, you would establish pricing that, is not quite so low. Now, conversely, if I say, just cut the price to whatever you do, as soon as you set that price in your mind, that becomes the benchmark. And when you raise the price, you're anchored against that low price. You're only going to raise it in small increments from there. So it will do you some harm over the long term. But the general principle of building your portfolio by using penetration pricing, charging less, or even working for free, that's perfectly valid. What I would say you don't get into these pitches where you give away all of your power. If you're invited to pitch for something and you're seen as the person who has the least amount of experience in the area, then just go to the client and say, listen, I don't have a lot of experience in this area. I understand it. I'm willing to put more effort into it. I'm not going to pitch for free. I'm not going to get into the shootout. So if there's another firm that you want to hire, I would say just go ahead and hire that firm. Now, if you're willing to kind of work with me to let me build the portfolio, I can do a couple of different things. But number one, I could guarantee my price. So I'll give you a price, it's X. And my commitment to you is I will work on this until you're happy. And if you're not happy at any point, I'm just giving you your money back. So you guarantee it. But you're establishing price integrity, and you're offering a guarantee. And that's the first thing that I would have you do. So I wouldn't have you pitch, because that's another thing that you're going to just get. That's another dark tunnel that you don't want to get into. Once you're into it, it's really hard to extricate yourself from it. So just have this direct conversation with the client, guarantee your work, offer to guarantee, and just be honest about the state of your situation. Listen, I'm fairly new at this. I think I would do a really good job at this. I've done this once or twice before. It's going to take me a little bit longer. I'm willing to put in the hours. You won't see it on your end. It's just going to be more effort on my end. We might have to communicate a little bit more than you would communicate with somebody else, but I'm willing to guarantee it. So try that. And then the other option would be, in certain situations, it might make sense for you to say, listen, would you give me this job if I did it for free? I mean, it's a radical idea. I put it out there as a radical idea. And again, one of the reasons why it might make sense is you're not going to get stuck doing work for free for very long.
Absolutely. I think that pro bono work is actually a very good way to add value to yourself, because
yes.
I think that especially younger artists, they need to develop quickly the skill that allow them to understand when they're adding value only to the client and when they're adding value to themselves as well. And I think that I know that this is your interview, but I'm going to tell you this. I created a conference that now is the biggest conference on the planet for the stuff that we do, which is architectural visualization. And the first 2 years, we made zero money. And people were suspicious of that. They would ask me, hey, you're making money. It's impossible that you're doing this for free. I'm like, the fact that we're putting ourselves out there and we are reaching all these people with this conference is going to give me fruits in the future. And this idea, I was never able to make people believe in this. Now it's been a couple of years that we have been able to monetize. And actually, the conference is not my main business. I do stuff with the industry because I was able to put myself out there. And this is one of the things that I always say to people. Understand when it is that you're adding value to yourself, and then you can use that to add value to yourself and try to get to the place where you want to be. But I don't know. I think that you make a very good point explaining.
No, it's a great way to think about it, though. And I think, why is it so odd why is the idea that a conference would not make money in the first couple of years odd? I would suggest to you most conferences don't make money in the first few years. Most businesses don't make money in the first few years. You're investing. You're taking risk. You think of Twitter, and there are all kinds of other technology examples out there. Twitter's billions of dollars into Twitter before they even knew how they were going to monetize it. They're just building an audience, and they know once they build an audience, the obvious monetization approach is through advertising, but there are others. It could be subscription, et cetera. There's a number of different things Twitter could have done. But they knew once they had the audience, there would be all kinds of different ways to monetize that audience. And you did the same thing, and lots of businesses. I'm not sure it directly applies to a design-based business, but there's some analogies that work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can. It's just that, then at this point, companies need to know how to diversify in order to, build on one side the portfolio, and on the other side, they have to pay bills and people. Usually this is what we do when we work together, me and my clients. We try to see where we have some blind spots where we can make a little bit more money whilst we build a better portfolio.
Yeah,
but
great
anyway,
way to look at it.
Yeah. Listen, this is a question that I get often asked and that I like to ask to other designers. How does a company go about raising the perception of value for their services? And in case, how does one communicate value to a client?
It's a great question, and I love the way you asked it. We think about value creation and the value of our services. But the truth is the value of our services lies in the beholder or the buyer. Every client is different. Every situation is different. The value, even if you do the same service, let's call it X, architectural visualization to whatever standard, that same service to different clients is going to have different values. And in my book, Pricing Creativity, the first rule of pricing creativity is to price the client, not the service or the job.
That would have been the next question.
So we think, well, I know my value of this architectural visualization is, I know it's worth $10,000 in the market. It might not be worth $10,000 to that client. It might only be worth $2,000. It might be worth $100,000 to that client. And what it's worth is also a function of the availability of substitutes. Like, where else can they get exactly that? But the job of communicating value really starts with uncovering value. So it starts with, what is the value of this to you, Madam Client? And in the book, Pricing Creativity, the longest chapter, the one I labored over the most, is called Master the Value Conversation. And it's one of the rules of pricing creativity to master the value conversation. And in that chapter, I give you the model for how to conduct a value conversation. It's a simple 4-step model. It's essentially figure out what the client wants, figure out what the metrics of success are, try to determine the value that might be created, and then set some pricing guidance. And that's a simple 4-step framework for conducting the value conversation. We're trying to uncover the value and then set some pricing guidance. It's simple, but it's not easy. We don't, designers, creative people, most people in business and salespeople in general, this does not come natural to them. Doesn't come natural to them because through the entire value conversation, you are not talking about you. You are not talking about your services. You're not thinking about your costs. And so I refer to this ability to master the value conversation as the most valuable skill in all of business. It's simple, but it's not easy. Very few people can do it. The reason they can't do it is your audience, they're watching this and listening to it. You are all subject matter experts. You're experts at what you do. And subject matter experts see patterns everywhere. So when you start to ask the client about their problem or the opportunity, or another way to frame it would be, what is it that the client wants to be true at the end of this engagement? When you start to ask the client and get them talking, the client starts to talk, you start to see patterns, you jump ahead, you think, I've seen this before, I know what your problem is, I know what your solution is, I know what we charge for the solution. And you leap ahead. And the focus, even though it started out being on the client, now it's all about you and your ideas of your costs and market value, etc. And master the value conversation, you really need to let go of that. You need to learn to let go of your subject matter expertise and replace it with process expertise. And the process is simply to navigate this 4-step framework and have the focus be entirely on the client. Because when you navigate the value conversation properly, you set price before you arrive at the solution. And that's the way it should work. And in any industry that has undergone pricing transformation, that switch has always happened. Instead of going from your solutions, your costs, and then therefore then marking up your costs to get to your price, you just let go of all of that and you focus on the client. What do you want, Madam Client? How will we measure? What will we measure to determine whether or not you've achieved what you want? What is the value of getting what you want? If I could help you create this value and get what you want and hit these metrics, what would you be willing to pay for that? And once you have the answers to those questions, then you can go back and in a situation you might say, well, okay, so they'd be willing to pay $2,000 for this or euros for this. And our full architectural visualization or whatever it is that you're selling, we usually charge X. Then you have to rethink your solution. You have to come up with a solution that is profitable to you at the client's stated price. Now, if you follow the second rule of pricing creativity, which is to always offer options, then you will come back with options, and one of them will be at that €2,000 price, and then one might be at 10,000 or 20,000. But if the client says, this is how much I'm willing to spend on something, you have an obligation to provide a solution at that price point. And the obligation to yourself is that solution should be profitable. And that implies that the solution might be less than what the client really needs. And you might say, here's a €10,000 solution, and here's one that's only 5,000. So it's, sorry, that's a long answer to your very good question.
But I think, all this is needed because there is something that is fundamentally wrong with the way some artists think about, especially ethics. And I see this on a day-to-day basis. Like this type of conversation that we just had, a lot of artists will find it unethical. They will say that it's wrong, that, you cannot price the client because the client is buying a product, and this product has a market price. Why would you think otherwise? And this is probably a question to you.
You know what's unethical? I mean, neither of these are unethical, but I'll just counter that argument and say what's unethical is to sit across the table from somebody who has a business problem and they need a solution, and for you to, instead of sell a solution, sell a product. That's unethical.
It's a beautiful
when
answer.
you're coming to the table thinking, I'm going to sell you this product, and you're just making all of these assumptions, you haven't had a meaningful conversation to the client about what they value, you've missed the opportunity to uncover chances to create extraordinary value beyond what you were initially thinking when you were product focused. You can be product focused or you can be client focused. And I often ask audiences at the beginning of a talk, I'll say, what's the goal of value-based pricing? And the common answer is, it's to charge more. And I say, no, that's not it. That's just a delightful consequence or side benefit. And then at the end of the talk, I say, what's the goal of value-based pricing? And they usually get it. The goal of value-based pricing is to create an organization that is focused, laser focused on extraordinary value creation for the client.
Yes.
And by the end of the talk and by the end of the book, I get people to see you're not focused on the client. You're not focused on value creation. You're focused on selling products, and you're distracted by the market value of those products. You really need to completely reverse your thinking on the subject. And if I have enough time with people, I'll get everybody to see that that's true. And these ideas of the unethics of charging different people different prices, they go away.
Okay, so let me just ask you something, related to this, but maybe with a little bit more need for pragmatism. In an industry where some specific services like making images or renderings or even maybe a logo, where, these products, if you like, they have a so-called market price, how do you control the value conversation with a client that argues about you being too expensive or not to respect market prices? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. and you control it by having a value conversation where the focus is all on the client, and you're not even talking about a product. So let's say you're the client, I'm the designer, and you're launching a new company, and you want a new logo for that new company, and there's no revenue right now. And I sit down with you and I conduct the work. So I might, if I'm product focused, if the focus is all on me and my products, then I might say to you, well, logos are €5,000. And you say, well, I don't, that's too much money. You say, well, I can get a logo on Fiverr.com or 99 Designs or Upwork for €100. And the truth is, the client can get a logo for free, probably anywhere from free to millions, right? And my price just happens to be in this range, and you say that's too much money, and I think you're a bad client because you're not valuing. It's not really about it's not really about my time. I need to find out what it is that you want. So I would say, Fabio, okay, so I understand you're looking for a logo design. Let me begin at the beginning. You're launching this new company. I want to know what it is that you really want. I want you to think, let's jump ahead into the future about 3 years. It's 3 years from today. You and I'm in Tel Aviv. We're having coffee, and you're really happy with your progress over the last 3 years. I want you to describe to me, what's happened to make you so happy. And then you start to describe, okay, well, so I've launched the business. I've got some level of success, and I say, describe the success to me. So I get you to paint this very vivid picture of the future, and I call that the desired future state. So step one, I uncover what you want or your desired future state. And then I say to you, step two is to assign metrics. Like okay, so you talked about success, and you said sales are high. Let's quantify that. What does that mean? What does success mean? When you say high sales, what do you mean? I'm doing 10 million in sales. Success is I've got time off. I'm doing so. You uncover these things that we can measure. And then I say to you, okay, what's the value of this? 10 million in sales, what kind of margin are we talking about? So we're talking about profit, or you're personally making this much money. You're using this time off to spend time with your family. You're going on holidays, etc. I'm uncovering all these different forms of value. And then I say to you, step four is to offer pricing guidance. And I say to you, if I could help you get here. And I haven't mentioned logo really other than just at the beginning. And I've kept it very broad about what does success look like. And you're bringing in the context in your mind as the client. That's one of the keys to doing this well. You're narrowing. I'm keeping it broad, and you're kind of narrowing it on your own. And I say to you, if I could help you get to this place through launching your company, etc., what would that be worth to you? And in this moment, you're going to say, well, if we're talking about logos, and I might say, well, yeah, but logos are attached to other things. And so I expect to come back with a proposal to you on logos, but I also want to use this conversation to think of different ways that we can, I don't want to just sell you a logo. I want to help you get to this place of future success that you just described. And if you will allow me some leeway, I'll go away after this and I'll think creatively about beyond just logos, about how I can help you. And I'll come back with a price for a logo with, different ways that I could, design logos for you, et cetera. But I'd like the opportunity to think bigger about it. And then, so you might say, well, I'm hoping to get a logo for €500. But, if you can help me, if you can really, really be a partner and help me, maybe there's maybe over the years, so there's 10,000, who knows? I don't know. I'm open. And I say to you, okay, so I'll come back with a proposal with some options. I'll have a €500 option and I'll have some higher options. And I might be, if the goal is $1 million in 3 years, $1 million of profit in 3 years, I might have an option that's 100, who knows, 100,000. so we're still having a kind of a broad, the focus has been all about you, what you want, your metrics of success, the value might be created, pricing guidance, vague conversation about pricing guidance. And now I go away and I'm allowed to think about the product, and I'm allowed to think about my costs, and I'm allowed to think about prices. And one of the keys to the value conversation is, in this moment, you get through the value conversation without thinking about your product. You have all of these things to work with, what the client wants, the metrics, the value to be created, some rough idea of pricing guidance. Now you think creatively. And in that moment, if you just come back with 3 different prices for 3 different levels of logo design, you've failed, because you've uncovered all kinds of opportunities to create value well beyond the logo. And so that shift of going from product to client through mastering the value conversation, it triggers this entrepreneurial inspiration in you. When you sit down to craft your proposal, you should be thinking, you should stress the boundaries of your business model. You think of yourself as a designer or even an identity designer in that moment. And when you realize, oh my God, I could help create millions of euros in value here. The client might be willing to pay me 100,000 instead of 2,000. How would what would I do for 100,000? What's the most I could do? So you start to think creatively, and you go back to the client with your proposal, and you always start with the most expensive one, the most elaborate one. That's rule number 3, anchor high. And so I say to you, okay, Fabio, I've had some fantastic ideas on how I could help you get to this place, help you get what you want, hit these metrics of success, create the value that we talked about. And I'm going to start with the most elaborate one. I first ask myself, what's the most I could do for you? What's the highest level of certainty that I, a designer, could bring to your business to help you achieve all of these things? And the answer I came up with is it's really interesting. Hold on to your hats, because it's priced at 120,000 euros. And it doesn't matter that you fall out of your chair, because the job of that anchor price is really just to make the other options seem less affordable. But when you have this sticker shock, and then I walk through something that's so much more than me selling you a product. It's me essentially being a business partner to you on certain things. Yeah. And when I say being a business partner, what I mean by that is you're putting if you're going to put these really high numbers out there, you put some of that compensation at risk. So if it's 120,000 euro, it might be a base fee of 20 or 100, and the rest of it is earned through performance pay of some kind. And so I countered by saying, what's unethical? What's unethical is selling a product when a client wants a solution. In this case, I'm putting forward an option for us to really partner together. And by partner, I mean my incentives are aligned to your success. I'm thinking beyond just selling you a product. I've thought creatively about how I can help you achieve success. I'm going to be paid well, but I'm tying some of that compensation to your success. You as the entrepreneur, you might choose to not take that option and just pay me 2,000 for a logo or whatever, or hire somebody else. But the confidence that you get, that you have in me as somebody who was willing to think of this at a partnership level, truly, and think creatively and differently about the business, is going to be night and day difference. And people think about the market value of a logo. Whatever solution I came up with, my most elaborate solution, nobody else that you are talking to, no other designer is going to come up with exactly that solution. Therefore, it is not an apples to apples comparison.
I love how passionate you got to to this point. But I totally get it. And I think that probably the biggest mistake that people do, it's always to think, I'm going to have a value conversation because then I can find out what the budget is. When actually here, we want to plant a seed inside the head of the client and make the client understand that with us, they're not getting a product, they're getting a partner.
Yeah. And it's not about the budget. You'll uncover the budget if the client has an idea of a budget, but in some ways the budget doesn't matter. What matters is you uncover the value that you might help to create. That's what matters. And from there, you make all these decisions. So even if I decide in this conversation that, wow, I might be able to help you earn an extra $1 million a year. I could still come, and you have a budget of 2,000. I'm going to have a $2,000 or euro solution. But I kind of have an obligation, I think, to put forward, maybe a multiple six-figure solution that would help you to earn this money. And then it gets complicated because every price has an uncertainty discount built in. So, okay, I could help you create an extra $1 million a year. Could somebody else do that? If I didn't do that, could you do it on your own? What's the level of, am I willing to just absolutely outright guarantee success and not get paid until you achieve these things? That would be known as a contingency payment. That's one extreme. The other extreme is you just get paid for your time. Or am I going to ask for a certain payment and then tie bonuses to certain milestones? So there's lots of nuance in there.
Blair, how are you set time-wise? Because we've been talking already for 50 minutes.
Oh, we have. Yeah, I've got another 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay,
yeah.
Then I want to ask you a couple more questions because there's just so much that I want to ask you. Okay, so let's talk about somebody that is trying to, or that is thinking about starting a solo career. So going from being an employee somewhere to wanting to open their first studio. What would you recommend to a person that is trying to start their business as a creative?
I think if you've attained some level of success, if you've had the variety, if you've achieved kind of variety of doing different disciplines for different types of different markets, while being paid by an employer, then I would, and you can see an opportunity to specialize right away, I would go pursue that specialism right away. If you're starting just out of design school on your own, it probably makes sense to be a freelancer, somewhat generalist, and try to find the niches after that. But that first piece of advice I would offer is if you've attained your success as an employee, like if you've experienced some variety as an employee and built up your various skills, choose your specialism right away.
Let me ask you about innovation. There is a tweet of yours that I've read recently. Business innovates faster than science because in business, we understand innovation comes from the outside and the market is the judge. Science fights both of these things and hence advances only through funerals. I agree with this 100%, but I also see how difficult it might be for a creative person to have to create the new because the mass market often demands simply what already works, right? How does an artist or a designer go about breaking these standards and then launch new ideas in the market and then, the market hopefully accept them?
Well, we might be thinking about markets differently because to me, the market for a designer it's a B2B market. So there are businesses, and all businesses, maybe not all, they all say they're looking for innovation or disruption. So you have an invitation to innovate and disrupt. Even I believe you have an open invitation, or you should see yourself as having an open invitation to disrupt the way they hire a firm like yours. I once spoke at a conference, and it was an owners of ad agencies, and they said the theme of the conference is leadership through disruption or something. And I thought, okay. And they wanted me to speak along with other people who are in kind of my space offering business development advice to ad agencies. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to completely disrupt their buying process. And I listed a bunch of crazy demands. I basically said, I'm not going to speak at a conference where I'm not going to be on a panel with my direct competitors. In fact, I'm not going to speak at this conference. But if you're willing to unhire the others and just bring me in, then that's something I'd be interested in. And there's some steps in between and some conversations. And ultimately, I was able to completely disrupt. They had to unhire people. They had to pay me more than they thought they were going to pay me. And it was just, I just enjoyed the process so much. And then when I got up there, I talked about it a little bit. It was kind of lost on everybody. It's like they expected some basic platitudes, but I gave them an example of this is how you lead through disruption. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your question, Fabio. I just wanted to tell that story.
Well, I was asking you how you go about creating the new when the market is always demanding for, what works. And I can give you an example, like...
Please, yeah.
It could be like, we want to have a logo with a matte background, or we want to have an image of a building with a blue sky and everything needs to look like it's the happiest place on earth. How do you go and offer something different? Like, how should that happen? Do you do it for a client? How do you take the risk? How do you convince the client of taking the risk? Because, it is a risk that people need to take in order to innovate, right?
Yes, and you're painting an example of a client who is essentially art directing or micromanaging the designer. So in this situation, let's just role play this a little bit. I'll just pretend you're the client. You've just said to me that you want to have these certain things in the logo or the design. And I would just say to you, I appreciate, Fabio, that you have these ideas of what you want it to look like. But if we're going to work together, I would ask you to respect the talent that I'm bringing to the table. I'm the designer. And so what I would ask you is, instead of agreeing to put a building or whatever it is that you wanted in the logo, I would say to you, just let go of the execution. The execution is on me. And I'm going to ask you questions like, what is the importance of a building to you? What is the underlying attribute or benefit that you want to communicate that makes you think it should be a building? And then I'll get to that. And then you need to allow me, I promise you, I will uncover what it is that you are trying to communicate and convey and the important things that we will need to convey. And then I would ask you to give me the freedom to execute that as I see fit. And of course, you will approve whatever I design. But if I come back to you with a design and you say, put a building in it, or make that blue darker, that's execution. That's my domain. So if I come back with a design and you say, I want you to do X, I'm going to ask you, why is it that you want me to do X? What do you think is not being communicated in this piece? And then I'll get to the heart of that. and then I'll make the revision, but I'm going to make the revision based on how I see fit. So if you want my best work, that's how we're going to get to it. And so you're allowed to, and I say this in the manifesto, you're allowed to say that blue doesn't convey our core message of strength. You're not allowed to say make it darker, and you're certainly not allowed to say make it Pantone 537. That's on me. So you're allowed to say that this doesn't work for this reason, and then I have to take that and I have to find a way to execute. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I can already see where people would not believe in this type of conversation, because usually the interactions that a lot of artists have with clients are through RFP. So, you just get an email, which is a generic email, asking for like, say, 4 views or 5 views, and I'm giving you a specific example of the architecture visualization industry. But at the same time, I know that it works if you try and pursue the conversation with the client. And, last February I was in Australia. I met one of your clients, Andrew Hoyne, and he actually told me that he has basically built his business and the way he has conversations with his own clients based on your teachings. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because whoever is listening from home, they need to have a little bit of faith that they can change the status quo. It can be changed, and they have to believe in what you're saying, because I've applied these things also myself, and I've seen a huge improvement in the amount of business that came my way, and the fact that I was able to lead a better conversation, or at least to be identified by my client as more than just an executioner, and more as a person that is there because I want to help. Okay, and I'm saying this, and I'm sorry that I interrupted you, but I think that people need to get it in their coconuts, as I say. I want to ask you one more thing. Do I have the time?
Yes.
Please. This is also one of your recent tweets. And the reason why I want to ask you this is because it has to do with patience, which is something that I feel a lot of young artists simply lack. In the first decade or so of your career as an independent creative, you'll be fascinated and fulfilled by the many and varied challenges of your clients' businesses. Success will arrive, however, when you begin to find greater fascination in the challenges of your own business. Would you mind expanding a little bit on this so that...
Yeah, we touched on this just a little bit at the beginning of this conversation. I think a designer wants to solve the problem and save the world. I love all creatives, but I love designers for that higher calling. They want to solve the problem and save the world. And earlier in their career, they might have, and even later in the career sometimes, they have a kind of a narrow idea of the types of problems that they want to solve. And it's narrow meaning they don't want to be limited to narrow ones. They think they want to solve the problem they haven't previously solved before. And that's at the core of why so many creative firms are poorly positioned, because designers, creative people in general, are drawn to the new and the different, because creativity is not the ability to draw or write. It's the ability to see. It's the ability to bring novel perspective to a problem. Therefore, creative people are drawn to problems that they haven't previously solved. So we have this horrible. We have the very human beings are horrible predictors of what they will like. So your strength, your superpower, is thinking about problems differently. And you think early in your career, you're going to build a business that allows you to solve all of these different client problems. And you think that's the only way that you're going to get reward. You think that's the path to your happiness. And then one day you'll realize that I always imagine me standing back and observing you, the designer, over the course of your career. We just fast forward, and I'm like God. I'm standing there over you, watching you, and I see you being drawn to this client problem and this client problem and this client problem. And in the beginning, it's all you're having fun and you're enjoying it, and maybe you're not making very much money, and you think the money will come. And I'm watching and watching, and I know what's going to happen. And what's going to happen is at some point in your career, you're going to go, okay, this has all been fun and I'm kind of creatively fulfilled, but haven't really made the money I've wanted to make. And I need to have an honest conversation with myself. And the language I use is you look in the mirror and you say, I'm tired of having fun. Now I just want to make some money. And you begrudgingly decide that you're going to quit focusing on the clients a little bit, maybe have your people, hire some people and have them focus on your clients. And you're going to act like a grown-up CEO and you're going to start facing the business challenges, and you're convinced it's not going to be fun. You're convinced that by giving up solving the client's problems, the reason you got into this business, it's all going to go away. It's now just going to be a job or a business. It's going to be drudgery. And that's wrong. What you're going to find when you quit focusing on the client business and you start being a CEO, what you're going to find is that the challenges of running your own business are just as fascinating. And the opportunity to bring your creative superpower to bear, to think about problems differently, is you are now the client, right? So if you have a shitty client, it's your fault because you're the client. You're now the client. You have absolute freedom to think differently about these problems, to try novel solutions. And when you get into it and you start to tinker with your business, and you try things, and you get some validation, you realize, oh, this works. You will fall in love with the idea that the most fulfilling problems are your own problems. And in the beginning, they're the problems that get in the way of you doing what you want to do, which is to solve your client's problems. But eventually, you will get to this place where you realize you begrudgingly decide, okay, I'm going to act like a grown-up now and start focusing on my business problems. You will realize these are the fun problems. So back to the idea of the designer wants to solve the problem and save the world. The mistake you make as the designer is to think the problems that you want to solve are the client problems. And they're interesting and different and all that in the beginning, but there's nothing more interesting than solving your business problem. And I think, and in my business, it's the business model challenge, because you're always rethinking your business model. I don't know if that's true in a design firm the way it is true in a consulting or a training company like my business. But even today, we're knocking over the business and rebuilding it. And we do that every 24 to 36 months. And I think that's a healthy way to do it. I'm looking for the next iteration or improvement in the business model. And I know that I could do this for another 30 years and I will never stop pursuing the perfect business model. And that to me is the most creative challenge there is.
Absolutely. I see it with the most successful companies in our sector. That's what they do. They over and over and over, they rebrand themselves, they change the way they do things, they change the discussion, they change the mission statement. It's an evolving machine, This is what our existence is all about, adaptation, right?
Yes.
Blair,
yes.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and beyond all of that, I'll just say, Fabio, designers, you see yourself as in this fee-for-service business model. Challenge that. If you couldn't earn money by sending an invoice, how would you choose to earn money? I'll finish with that thought.
Blair, thanks a lot for really taking the time. I have to say, and I did not say that in the beginning because I did not want to stress you out, but I'm a little bit starstruck. You're really one of my favorite authors, and we talk about your work in our community very often. Some people like you, some people like you a little bit less. But I don't know, you made a positive impact in my life, and therefore, I'm super happy to have had the chance to talk to you. If people want to find you, where can they find you? Give me, website, social media.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Fabio. I've really enjoyed this talk. They can find me at winwithoutpitching.com. On social media, I'm at Blair Enns on Twitter and LinkedIn. The Win Without Pitching Manifesto is available at Amazon, now in an audio format at Audible. Pricing Creativity is available only at pricingcreativity.com. And in the future, I hope you can find me visiting Fabio's house in Tel Aviv.
We'll make an Instagram story. Blair, thanks a lot for taking the time. I'm going to stop the recording. Don't go anywhere so that I can say thank you one more time, okay?
Great.
Thanks a lot again. Bye.